Have you ever wondered why some women walk through life with a strange mix of strength and fragility, as if they've been built to survive storms, yet still carry invisible wounds? Why some women appear almost hyper, aware of every shift in energy, every tone of voice, every unspoken word in a room, like they've been trained their whole lives to read danger before it arrives. These are not random traits. They are not accidents. They are the silent marks left on the daughters of narcissistic parents. A daughter raised by a narcissistic mother or father learns early that love is conditional. She discovers that her worth is tied to performance, to appearance, to how well she pleases, entertains, or sacrifices herself. And while this is heartbreaking, it creates something unusual, something both heavy and powerful. She grows into a woman who can sense disappointment before it is spoken. She feels tension before anyone else notices it. She can read faces, tones, and energies with a level of accuracy that seems almost psychic. Why? Because as a child, her survival depended on it. But here's the paradox. This unusual gift comes at a cost. She often doubts herself because she was taught that her reality doesn't matter. She was told her feelings were too much, her needs were selfish, her voice was unimportant. So, she carries this strange duality. She sees everything so clearly in others, but struggles to fully trust herself. Every daughter of narcissistic parents has this battle inside her, the part that is deeply empathetic and the part that silently questions if she's enough. She grows with an inner radar that protects her, but also exhausts her. And unless she learns to see these unusual traits as strengths, she risks repeating the cycle, attracting the same type of relationships, the same type of wounds. But let me tell you something powerful. What was once forced on her as survival can transform into her superpower. Her sensitivity can become her wisdom. Her awareness can become her shield. Her empathy can become the very force that heals not only herself, but others. The daughters of narcissistic parents are not broken. They are not weak. They are carriers of unusual traits that the world needs. They are the ones who can see through masks, the ones who can sense lies, the ones who can love more deeply because they know the pain of being unloved. So, if you've ever felt like you're too much, or too sensitive, or too aware, maybe it's not a flaw. Maybe it's the rare strength you were forced to develop in a house where love was distorted. And maybe, just maybe, it's time to see that what was meant to silence you has actually prepared you to step into a life of truth, authenticity, and unshakable power. You see, when a little girl grows up in a narcissistic household, she quickly realizes the home is not built on love, but on performance. It's not about who she is, but about what role she plays. If she's quiet, she's accused of being distant. If she's loud, she's called too much. If she expresses needs, she's selfish. If she stays silent, she's invisible. It is a no-win situation. And in that constant tug of war, she develops unusual traits that shape the rest of her life. The first is hyper-attunement to others. Imagine being so in tune with the emotional weather of a parent that you can sense their anger before they speak. Imagine being able to detect disappointment in the way their footsteps sound on the floor. That is what these daughters learn. They develop radar. They scan every face, every sigh, every pause. To survive, they learn how to predict moods, how to avoid conflict, how to adjust themselves like chameleons just to keep the peace. And later in life, this becomes a strange gift. She can read people. She can notice subtle shifts in energy that others completely miss. But the tragedy is, she often notices them at the cost of herself. She knows how others feel, but not how she feels. Then comes the second unusual trait, a deep need for validation and yet discomfort when receiving it. Why? because in her childhood, any moment of praise came with strings attached. You did well, but you could have done better. You look nice, but why don't you try harder next time? The praise was never unconditional. It was a trap to keep her striving, performing, and giving. So when she grows older, she craves affirmation because she was starved of it, but she doesn't fully trust it when it comes. If someone compliments her, she wonders, do they mean it, or will they take it away later? It creates a complicated relationship with love, with worth, with self-acceptance. The third unusual trait is empathy that runs deeper than most can imagine. Because she has felt the sting of neglect, she knows how important it is to be seen. Because she has felt the ache of being misunderstood, she listens in ways others don't. She doesn't just hear your words, she feels them. She doesn't just nod at your story, she carries it with her. This makes her magnetic. People are drawn to her without even knowing why, because they feel her presence, her depth, her willingness to understand. But here's the danger: her empathy often attracts takers. People who sense her giving heart and drain it, the same way her parents once did. And then there is the fourth unusual trait: perfectionism mixed with self-doubt. Growing up with narcissistic parents often means never feeling good enough. She could get top grades and still hear, "Why not higher?" She could dress beautifully and still hear, "Why didn't you try harder?" So she learns to chase perfection, hoping one day it will finally be enough to silence the voice of criticism. But deep inside, she doubts whether that day will ever come. And so she overworks, overthinks, overgives, all while questioning her worth. The world applauds her achievements, but she rarely feels them. And let us not forget the fifth unusual trait, an inner resilience that often shocks even her. Because here's the hidden truth: daughters of narcissistic parents survive what many could not. They survive years of manipulation, gaslighting, silent treatments, and conditional love. And while it leaves scars, it also leaves strength. They become women who can handle chaos, who can adapt, who can rebuild. Yes, they carry wounds. Yes, they struggle with trust, with intimacy, with self-love. But inside them is a strength forged in fire, the ability to rise, even when everything around them tried to break them. Now, here's what makes this even more powerful. When a daughter begins to heal, when she finally recognizes that these unusual traits are not just scars but tools, her life transforms. She learns that her hyper-attunement can become intuition, that her need for validation can evolve into self-affirmation, that her empathy can become her superpower, balanced with boundaries, that her perfectionism can shift into healthy excellence without self-punishment, and that her resilience can lead her into a life where she is not just surviving, but thriving. But to reach that place, she has to do something many never dare. She has to see the truth. She has to admit that the love she grew up with was not real love. That her parents' praise, criticism, or control were never reflections of her worth, but of their own emptiness. And in that painful truth lies freedom. Because once she understands this, she no longer has to replay the old script. She no longer has to chase love from unavailable people. She no longer has to shrink herself to keep the peace. She no longer has to doubt her own voice. She begins to reclaim the one thing she was never allowed to hold: her sense of self. And that is the greatest unusual trait of all. The daughters of narcissistic parents, when they heal, carry something rare: the ability to rise from the ashes of emotional neglect and build an authentic life rooted in truth, compassion, and power. They are not ordinary women. They are the ones who turn their deepest wounds into wisdom, who transform their survival into strength, who turn their unusual traits into rare gifts for the world. So if you are one of them, Hear me clearly. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are a woman who has been forced to develop unusual traits in an environment that tried to silence you. And those very traits, when embraced, can make you unstoppable. There is another unusual trait that almost every daughter of narcissistic parents carries, and it's an invisible mask of strength. On the outside, she often looks independent, capable, even unshakable. People admire her. They say she's strong, resilient, tough, and in many ways, she is. She learned to handle things alone because there was no safe place to fall. She grew up knowing that if she broke down, no one would truly hold her. So, she stitched her wounds quietly and built armor around her heart. But inside, that strength sometimes feels like a performance. She longs to be cared for, to be held, to rest. Yet she doesn't always know how to let someone in without fearing they will use her vulnerability against her. So she wears her mask of strength, while inside still yearning for tenderness. Another unusual trait is independence mixed with hidden loneliness. Because she was trained not to rely on her parents emotionally, she learned early, I can only count on myself. So she became resourceful, capable, sometimes even over-functioning. She doesn't wait for someone to help her. She moves forward on her own. But here's the paradox. While she's proud of her independence, deep inside she sometimes aches for connection. She longs for someone who will finally show up without conditions, someone who won't take her strength for granted. But because she is so used to carrying everything, people rarely see her loneliness. She hides it well, even from herself. Then there's the unusual relationship she has with boundaries. On one hand, she struggles with saying no, because as a child she was punished whenever she tried to have limits. Her parents taught her that her boundaries were disrespectful, selfish, or unloving. So she grew up learning to give in, to keep the peace, to sacrifice her comfort. But on the other hand, after years of being drained, she sometimes builds walls that are almost too high, pushing people away before they have a chance to hurt her. This dance between weak boundaries and rigid walls becomes part of her unusual makeup, something she has to carefully learn to balance as she heals. There's also a deep craving for authentic love, the kind of love that sees her for who she is, not what she can provide. Because she grew up in a house where love was conditional, she carries within her a hunger for something pure, safe, and unconditional. But here's the painful twist. That hunger can sometimes lead her into relationships where she tries to earn love all over again, replaying the same cycle she lived with her parents. She gives too much. She tolerates too much, she hopes too much. And when it doesn't work, she blames herself, just like she did as a child. This is why daughters of narcissistic parents often find themselves in relationships with partners who are emotionally unavailable or manipulative. Not because they want it, but because it feels familiar. Another unusual trait is an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. As a child, she might have been the peacemaker, the caretaker, the one who tried to keep harmony in a chaotic home. She felt responsible for everyone else's moods, everyone else's comfort, everyone else's peace, and that role follows her into adulthood. She apologizes even when it's not her fault. She over-explains to avoid being misunderstood. She feels guilty for resting, for saying no, for putting herself first. But what she doesn't always see is that this over-responsibility was planted in her by parents who made her carry emotional burdens that were never hers to begin with. Then there is her unusual relationship with trust. She wants to trust, desperately. But when your first caregivers betrayed your innocence by twisting truth, denying your reality, or making you doubt your own perception, Trust becomes complicated. She can either give it too quickly, hoping someone will finally be different, or hold it back so tightly that no one gets close. This push and pull with trust is one of the heaviest legacies of growing up under narcissistic parents. Another striking trait is her ability to spot manipulation quickly. While others may fall for sweet words or false promises, she notices the subtle shifts, the inconsistencies, the tone behind the tone. She knows what gaslighting feels like. She knows the tricks of guilt, shame, and silent treatment. So when someone tries those games, she sees through them faster than most. And while this can protect her, it also keeps her alert, sometimes even anxious, because she's always scanning for hidden motives. And let's not forget the unusual relationship she often develops with success and achievement. On the surface, she may look like an overachiever, driven, ambitious, always striving. Because in her childhood, achievement was one of the only ways to earn approval. She learns to chase accomplishments as proof of worth. But inside, those achievements rarely bring lasting fulfillment. She might graduate, land a job, buy a house, achieve her goals, but still feel a hollow echo, because she was never taught how to simply be loved without performing. Her unusual trait here is this restless drive. What once kept her surviving now keeps her running, even when she desperately needs rest. Yet, in all of these unusual traits, there is a hidden gift. The daughter of narcissistic parents often becomes the woman who can sit with another person's pain without turning away. She becomes the one who can love more deeply, because she knows what it feels like to be unloved. She becomes the one who can break cycles, who can choose to parent differently, love differently, live differently. And that is where her story shifts. Because the unusual traits that once weighed her down can, with healing, become the very foundation of her power. Her hyper-awareness becomes wisdom. Her empathy becomes a tool for deep connection. Her resilience becomes her confidence. Her longing for authentic love becomes the standard that shapes the relationships she allows into her life. This is the truth every daughter of narcissistic parents must one day face. What was once a survival mechanism can become her greatest strength if she dares to break the silence, see herself clearly, and stop carrying the weight of her parents' brokenness. So when you see a woman who feels too much, notices too much, loves too much, doubts herself too much, know this: she is not weak. She is not broken. She is not strange. She is the daughter of narcissistic parents. And those unusual traits she carries are not her curse. They are her map, leading her back to the woman she was always meant to be, before the world told her she wasn't enough. There is still more to uncover, because the unusual traits of daughters raised by narcissistic parents don't stop at what you can see on the surface. Some of them are hidden in the way she relates to friendships, love, work, even her own body. Another unusual trait is her complicated relationship with intimacy and closeness. For many daughters of narcissistic parents, closeness feels both desired and dangerous. On one hand, she longs for deep connection, someone to finally see her, hold her, love her without conditions. On the other hand, closeness can trigger fear, because as a child, closeness was often used as control. Her parent would pull her in only to criticize, shame, or demand. Love was not safe, it was a trap. So as an adult, she may find herself pulling people close, then pushing them away. Wanting intimacy, then fearing it. This push and pull is not because she doesn't want love. It's because she is relearning whether love can be safe at all. Another unusual trait shows up in her friendships. Many daughters of narcissistic parents become the giver, friend, the listener, the one who is always there. She knows how to hold space for others because she spent her life holding space for parents who never held space for her. But in friendships, this can create imbalance. She may find herself surrounded by people who lean on her strength, who come to her for advice, but rarely check in on her. And she may accept this for years because deep down, it feels familiar. It mirrors her childhood role, being there for others while no one is truly there for her. Only when she begins to heal does she start to ask, who really shows up for me? We also see an unusual trait in her relationship with work and success. Many daughters of narcissistic parents become high performers in their careers. They are driven, organized, detail-oriented. They push themselves harder than most. Why? Because they were trained to believe that worth is earned. They take that same pattern into adulthood and pour it into their jobs. Their bosses see them as dependable, committed, often irreplaceable. But here's the shadow. Sometimes she ties her entire identity to her work. If she fails at a project, she feels like she is a failure. If she isn't constantly achieving, she feels like she's fading. She doesn't always know who she is outside of performance, because performance was the only way she ever received attention as a child. Another unusual trait lies in her relationship with her own body and needs. Growing up, she was taught, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, that her needs were inconvenient. If she was hungry, tired, sad, or scared, it didn't matter unless it served the parent. So she learned to suppress her own needs. As an adult, this shows up as neglecting her body, skipping meals, overworking, not resting. Or it shows up as guilt whenever she does something for herself. She feels selfish for taking care of her own health, her own pleasure, her own rest. This is one of the heaviest burdens daughters of narcissistic parents carry: the inability to see their own needs as valid. And then there is the unusual trait of becoming a parent herself. This is one of the most powerful and emotional moments for many daughters. When she holds her own child, she feels two things at once: a fierce, protective love she never knew was possible, and a deep grief for the little girl inside her who never received it. She vows to break the cycle, to give her child what she never had. And she does, but in doing so, she sometimes swings to the other extreme, giving and giving until she is exhausted. Or she feels a shadow of fear of becoming like her parent, fear of repeating the very patterns she escaped. It is one of the most unusual, complex traits, the way she mothers, balancing between breaking the cycle and healing her own inner child. Another unusual trait is her relationship with silence. In a narcissistic home, silence was rarely peaceful. It was punishment. It was the silent treatment that left her walking on eggshells, unsure of what she did wrong, desperate to win back love. So as an adult, silence can be uncomfortable. If a partner grows quiet, she might panic. If a friend doesn't reply quickly, she may overthink. But with healing, she can reclaim silence, not as punishment, but as peace. And when she does, silence becomes a healing space instead of a haunting memory. There's also her unusual relationship with compliments and love. When someone loves her genuinely, tells her she's beautiful, tells her she's enough, she doesn't always believe it, because she was conditioned to believe love always had strings. That kindness always hit a hook, so part of her resists, questions, doubts, and yet, when she finally allows herself to receive it, when she finally begins to believe she is worthy of love without conditions, it becomes one of the most powerful healing moments of her life. All of these traits, these unusual patterns, they may sound heavy, but here's what's important to understand: they are not signs of weakness. They are signs of survival. They are the marks of a woman who has lived through the sharpest edges of love, and yet still chooses to feel, to give, to hope. and when she turns those traits inward, when she uses her empathy to care for herself, when she uses her resilience to build her own life, when she uses her awareness not to survive but to thrive, she becomes unstoppable. She becomes the woman who knows herself deeply, who can love without losing herself, who can walk away from manipulation without hesitation. She becomes the woman who finally says, "I am not who my parents said I was. I am who I decide to be." That is the real transformation of the daughter of narcissistic parents. She begins as a child who carries unusual traits as wounds. She becomes a woman who carries them as wisdom. So if you recognize yourself in these words, know this: you are not strange. You are not broken. You are not doomed to repeat the same story. You are a woman who has been forged in fire, and everything unusual about you is exactly what makes you extraordinary. There is yet another unusual trait that daughters of narcissistic parents often carry, and it lives quietly in the way they experience anger. Many of them struggle to express it, because in childhood anger was dangerous. If she expressed anger at her parent, she was punished, shamed, or told she was disrespectful. So she learned to swallow it, to bury it, to disguise it as a smile. On the surface, she may look calm, even agreeable, but inside, that anger can turn into shame, into self-blame, into quiet resentment. And sometimes it explodes later in ways she doesn't fully understand. This unusual relationship with anger means she often needs to learn, as an adult, that anger itself is not bad. That anger is simply a signal, telling her when something is unfair, unsafe, or unkind. Learning to use anger as a boundary, not a burden, is one of the greatest lessons she can embrace. Another unusual trait shows up in her voice, literally and figuratively. Many daughters grow up being told to be quiet, to not talk back, to keep it down. So their voices shrink. They stop speaking their truth, they soften their tone, they edit their words to avoid conflict. Sometimes even their physical voice carries hesitation, a quietness that hides their power. As adults, they may find themselves hesitating before speaking up in meetings, in relationships, even in small conversations. But here's the miracle: when they begin to reclaim their voice, when they allow themselves to speak with authority, with clarity, with emotion, it changes everything. Because their voice is not just sound, it is the expression of their truth, the truth they were once forbidden to carry. There is also an unusual relationship with joy. For many daughters, joy feels unfamiliar. Growing up, joy was often interrupted. Maybe she laughed too loudly and was told to quiet down. Maybe she was excited about something and her parent dismissed it. Maybe her happiness triggered jealousy or criticism. So she learned that joy wasn't safe, that it could be taken away. As an adult, she may struggle to fully allow herself to feel joy, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. But when she heals, when she gives herself permission to laugh freely, to enjoy without guilt, to embrace joy as her birthright, it becomes one of the most radical acts of freedom she can practice. Another unusual trait lies in her relationship with mistakes. In a narcissistic home, mistakes were rarely seen as human. They were seen as shameful. A bad grade wasn't just a mistake. It was proof she wasn't enough. A small slip wasn't forgiven. It was exaggerated. So she grew up fearing mistakes, sometimes even avoiding risks altogether. She becomes overly cautious, overly self-critical, because deep down she carries the belief that mistakes equal rejection. But part of her healing is realizing that mistakes are not proof of failure. They are proof of growth. And when she reclaims this truth, she begins to step into her life with courage, no longer held hostage by the fear of being wrong. Then there is her unusual relationship with forgiveness. People often pressure daughters of narcissistic parents to forgive quickly, to move on, to understand that parents did their best. But forgiveness for her is not simple. It is layered. It is painful. It is complicated, because forgiving does not mean forgetting, and forgiving does not mean pretending the wounds didn't shape her. Her unusual trait here is that she often wrestles deeply with forgiveness. Not because she is bitter, but because she wants it to be real. She wants to release the pain without betraying her truth. And when she finally reaches the point of forgiveness, it is not shallow. It is not forced. It is profound, rooted in deep self-understanding and freedom. Another unusual trait is the way she experiences love in adulthood. Because love in her childhood was tangled with control, criticism, and conditions, she often carries confusion into her adult relationships. Love may feel intense but unsafe. She may confuse chaos with passion or silence with rejection. She may choose partners who mirror her parent, unconsciously replaying the same story in hopes of rewriting the ending. But the healing comes when she realizes that love does not have to be earned, tested, or fought for. Love can be calm, steady, kind. And when she experiences that, often for the first time, it feels unusual, almost foreign, because real love is so different from what she knew. Another layer of her unusual traits is how she measures her worth. For many daughters, worth was tied to being useful, to being beautiful, to being perfect. So she grows up believing her value comes from what she gives, how she looks, or how well she performs. She may look successful, polished, even admired, but inside she may feel hollow, because she was never taught to see her worth simply for existing. This unusual trait often leads her into overgiving, overworking, overachieving, until one day she finally asks, "Who am I if I stop performing?" That moment, when she redefines her worth as something internal, not external, is one of the most life-changing turning points of her journey. Another unusual trait that cannot be overlooked is the way she carries both fragility and strength at the same time. She can cry easily, yet hold back tears for years. She can break under small words, yet survive storms that would shatter others. She is both delicate and unshakable, soft and fierce, and this paradox often confuses people. They don't see how she can be so strong yet still feel so much. But this duality is what makes her rare. She is not one or the other. She is both. The tenderness of a heart that still feels, and the toughness of a soul that still stands. And finally, one of the most unusual traits is the depth of her transformation when she heals. Because when a daughter of narcissistic parents truly heals, she becomes unstoppable. She breaks cycles that ran through generations. She becomes the mother, the partner, the friend, the woman who loves differently, gives differently, gives differently. She does not just survive her story. She rewrites it. She becomes proof that even the most painful beginnings can lead to the most powerful lives. So, when you look at daughters of narcissistic parents, understand this: everything unusual about them was shaped by survival. But survival is only the first chapter. The next chapter is transformation, and in that transformation, their unusual traits stop being scars and start becoming their superpowers. If you are one of them, carry this truth. You are not strange. You are not broken. You are not unworthy. You are a woman who has been sharpened by fire, and every unusual trait you carry is a mark of your resilience, your depth, and your destiny. You are not just the daughter of narcissistic parents. You are the woman who rises from it, stronger, wiser, and more powerful than anyone ever expected.